Bruce Lipton, Stephen Porges, that people that are kind of looking and going, my training and my studies and my, everything that I put my life and soul into 20 years ago really needs an update. And it's so lovely to see so many professionals starting to look at this new swathe of evidence that's coming forward.
No, absolutely. That's what I love as well. Even in the last few years, as I've been learning and developing and growing my knowledge, there's been a few things that have really kind of stuck out to me. As you say, Gabor Mate, amazing. And I read his book there, about the holding on to the trauma, the body holds the score.
Yeah.
Amazing. Read that. I did a course with Queen's and the Wave Trauma Centre there at the end of last year, all around the use of substances and in relation to trauma or as a response to trauma. And it was just absolutely fascinating, so interesting, and gave me a real, a better understanding and if I'm being honest, a better empathy as well, because... go on, no, you're fine.
I'm training with Gabor just now.
Amazing. Just casually, just Gabor, there he is, doing his things.
Doing a trauma and addiction course. And I think for me, because of, and I've not really mentioned this today, because of my own background, when I was 8 months old, I fell down a flight of concrete stairs in a baby walker, and that set the tone for a really traumatic and confusing childhood. My mum was alcohol dependent. My dad was very disconnected through trauma, emotionally and kind of physically disconnected. And never really, he grew up without a mum, and his dad was very hard on him and owned a pub. And so there was lots of different things, like my childhood was probably 10 times better than my mum and dad's childhood. My kids' childhood is 10 times better than my childhood. And if you can pass on that healing, but there comes a point in one generation that just goes, no, it stops, and it stops now. And I think, by age 8, I'd experienced every abuse you could imagine, and not directly at the hands of my mum and dad, but through being left in vulnerable situations. And I was introduced to alcohol at age 8, and I remember, and I've written a poem, and I have like a wee video that you can see on my social media and various different things, and it was my letter to addiction. And at 8 years old, it was just like this comforting, warm blanket that just said, I can make that stuff go away. And then I remember, I was at a party in my mum and dad's house, and I remember going through after drinking it and feeling warm and fuzzy, and then telling jokes and being funny, and all the adults were laughing, and I thought, this is what it's like to fit in. This feels great. And then kind of continuing to sneakily steal alcohol at parties, but then at 13, 14, getting someone to go to the shop and buying like quarter bottles or half bottles of vodka and just drinking them straight, and then being introduced to cannabis and just being introduced to this really lovely intervention that was just like, we can make that bad stuff go away. If you just come here, it's nice and comfortable, I'll be your friend, I'll help you through the bad times, and see all the horrible thoughts, see all the horrible things, I can make them go away. But ultimately what happens is they then produced other environments that then enabled other events to happen. And so then it almost became like, well, that was just, and it almost became like I then repeated lots of different situations to try and get a different outcome, to almost like free myself from that trauma. So I would go from one domestic violence relationship to another domestic violence relationship. At one point I was anorexic, and I was sent to the hospital, and it was the Royal Ed, and the Royal Ed Hospital is like, it's the main sort of hub for pretty much all of Scotland, all the specialists and stuff were there, and I remember thinking, oh my God, I must be seriously messed up to go there. But for me, because as a kid we were told, my dad had told us, don't tell anyone about your mum's drinking, because social services will be involved, and there was lots of different things. So on one side of the door, I was being told, don't tell anyone about what your mum's doing. This is our secret. If anybody finds out, because my dad was so heart scared that we were going to be taken off them. But when I was on the other side of the door, I was being told, do your best. Don't think you're better than anybody else. Don't bring any trouble to this door. So I always had to have this secret. So when the doctor referred me to the Royal Ed, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I must be really absolutely crazy. That is it. Like, they're sending me to the Royal Ed. But even scarier than that was someone has sussed my secret. Oh my goodness, they know I'm not eating. And this was the one thing that was for me. It was the one thing I had myself. So within the space of about 2 or 3 weeks, it's amazing how the mind works, because I then thought, right, well, if I do eat, and I can then just be sick, and nobody will know, and it'll be my secret. So from, you know, borderline anorexic to bulimic in such a short space of time, you know, from alcohol, drinking a litre of Jack Daniels over a couple of nights with, you know, a quarter of grass, to the next weekend, you know, snorting a quarter of cocaine, to the next weekend having ecstasy, and it was all just that avoidance of pain. It was using whatever means possible to achieve that numbness, that comfortable feeling of that it just allows you to just, you know, avoid that shame. When you feel like you're to blame for so many things, you internalise that blame and it becomes your shame, and you carry it, and it's like, I can't possibly show anybody this because they'll reject me, they'll hate me, they won't want me. And you know, the first thing I heard when I was born, my mum wanted a wee boy. She'd had a wee boy before me who had died when he was 6 weeks old, and she was told I was a wee boy. And of course I was born, and the first thing I heard was, oh, I didn't want a wee girl. I thought it was going to be a wee boy. Now, people think babies don't, you know, they don't know much, but to be born and have that, even just being in that energy of, didn't really want a wee girl, but I suppose if I've got one. And I screamed constantly. Like, I remember one of my mum's neighbours saying that she came out to the house 3 or 4 times, and my mum just left me to scream, because I just screamed and screamed and screamed and screamed and screamed. And because she had her own trauma and stuff, she would just totally leave me to scream. I remember wetting myself whenever my mum came anywhere near me as a kid. So there was lots of different things until I almost died. And I think it sometimes takes for you, and I think we all have the opportunity to live twice, but we only get to live the second life when we realise the first life is actually the only one we have. And going through a near-death experience got me to wake up to that, and got me to realise that, you know, all of that's my story, but it's not who I am. And you can change that story at any point simply by just changing the page, by starting a new chapter, by doing whatever it takes, and just challenging everything that you think, because your values, your beliefs, your decisions, your attitudes all come from what was put in your imprint stage. So between 0 and 7 as a kid, very rarely do we go back and challenge that stuff. And we think that everything that we think we know about ourselves, other people and the world is our belief. But if you look at the word belief, the 3 letters in the middle is L-I-E. So what about if you looked at everything you think you believe about yourself as a lie, and challenge it in that way? I'm off, Katie. I'm off and away. Like, that's me.
No, that's amazing. No, honestly, I say this every time we do something. I just say I could just sit and listen to you speak forever. Like, you need to make an audiobook or something, because I would just sit and listen to that. So, no, it's amazing. And thank you, you know, as always, you're so honest and candid and open. And I think people appreciate that, you know, whether it is in, you know, through therapeutic work, whether through discussions, whether it's even, you know, in the business community. And I think that's where we're seeing the biggest shift, actually, in terms of breaking down of stigma that surrounds it, you know, because you've got people like us that have experienced trauma, yes, to different degrees, but, you know, we've all had, you know, traumatic experiences and things that we've been through that have shaped us. However, now that we can speak about it, and, you know, we've got that platform where it's almost safer now. You know, you can have this chat. You're not going to be judged for saying, well, this is who I am at the end of the day. And as you say, this is what has happened up till this point. This is my story, and I can't change what has happened, but I can change going forward now. You know, I can look, I can evaluate, I can assess, and I can, you know, work out the best way of going forward.
I think by opening up, and, you know, even when you look at the likes of Brené Brown's work, and the work that she's done in terms of research and shame and vulnerability, is when you show up and you show your vulnerability, then you almost give permission for people to do the same. But what tends to happen with vulnerability, and why people think it's such a weakness, is because for a lot of us, vulnerability is an involuntary thing that has been thrust upon us. We get pushed into vulnerable situations, and we then kind of make this decision that I'll never be vulnerable again. I will not allow myself to open up to that fear, that pain, that hurt, that sadness, whatever it is that has caused that vulnerable situation. But when you flip that around and say, I am going to voluntarily make myself vulnerable, and we do that by speaking up, by telling our truth, by owning our shit, it's looking at your ugly, horrible stuff and saying, this is mine and I'm so grateful for it. Mm-hmm. And I always say, I used to look at the experiences I had as almost like my they were like my scars, my horrible ugly bits, but now they're my badges of honour. It's my yes, I did go through that, yes, that did happen to me, but here's how I look at it now. Here's how I give thanks. Like, I was married when I was very young, and my husband was struggling with his own stuff and just wasn't very nice. Was actually quite violent and was quite a dangerous man. For years I hated him. For years I would say I absolutely hate him, and I would wish really horrible things on him. When I was a kid, when I used to walk down one side of the street and my mum would walk up the other side of the street, and she was drunk and she was maybe banging off the walls or singing in the street, and I used to walk and hide my eyes, and I used to actually say, like, I hate my mum. I wish she wouldn't do that. And now I look back and I think, wow, I am so lucky to have been nurtured by a woman who taught me so much about trauma, who taught me so much about being disconnected from who you are, who taught me so much about the hurt and the pain and how it can manifest and how it can really just dull your sparkle and steal everything from you. And then I was really lucky to marry a man who showed me that in a way that when we first got together, he was my warrior. He was this big bully gangster type guy who people were scared of, and my tiny wee child in me who just wanted protected loved that, because she went, oh, this big warrior will look after me. And then what happened is my bubbly, go lucky, happy girl that he fell in love with, she kind of stepped aside and she showed him this scared, vulnerable child. And his warrior and this great guy who was going to look after me, when he stepped aside, he showed me this vulnerable, scared boy who was kicking and fighting and making sure he got control, because nobody would ever take control of him. And I was like, wow, I'm so lucky to have been taught these lessons by people who were so close to me, who shared their fear and their pain and their guilt and their hurt with me and wrapped it up as love and connection. And I accepted it and I took it as mine. And then I opened it and I realised that it was like broken glass, and it cuts and it hurts and it just rips you apart from the inside. But then I also was able to then kind of say, well, do you know what? The best care is self-care. So how do I go about repairing these cuts? How do I go about mending these bruises and these scars? And how do I go about really loving me in a way that I looked for these other people to do? My mum taught me so much about energy. She taught me that, when I used to go home, I would go in the front door, and as soon as I opened the door, I would say, it's me. And I still do it to this day. It's me. And depending where my mum's voice came from would depend on my next step. Did I go in and go into the kitchen? Did I go in and just go straight upstairs to my bedroom? Or did I simply drop my bag, close the door, and come back later when my dad was home? And that served me so well. So I can sit in the therapy room and nobody has to say a word. And I can pretty much pick up what's been happening. I can pretty much pick up, in terms of even just a couple of sentences, what that person's really trying to say, how they're trying to articulate based on what it is they think that I want to hear. So I give thanks. I have massive gratitude to the people who have showed me the uglier sides of life, because I now know in my therapy room I hold space for people. I don't go home wearing their stuff. I allow them to psychologically vomit, but it's